I'm Diane Sare from New Jersey, and I am one of the 6 LaRouche Democrats. Basically, I think people are here and people are in a complete state of agitation because the United States is right now disintegrating before our eyes. And for Americans, we have a particular urgent responsibility because we can change the world, whereas other nations are not in a position to do that, nor are their populations. The American citizenry has the ability to directly influence and change the government. And that's why they have gone through such lengths. Many people we talk to say, why don't I see you on television? How come they're not announcing the crash on television? Well, because now they're admitting it. Anyways, the point is almost every single newscaster is a multimillionaire. It's worth thinking about. So you're not likely to get an unbiased, truthful opinion from them. So what I wanted to actually go through is a little bit personal. Because Rachel and I and some of the other candidates have recently been meeting with Mr. LaRouche in Virginia. And he is really pressing for a number of reasons. One, he's about to celebrate his 89th birthday. So he's guaranteeing another 10 years of activity, but he said that once you get to be over 90, you don't want to guarantee too much. But even more than that, and of course he is not thinking of himself, is that we are at the breakdown of the entire transatlantic system. And unfortunately, what we are suffering from most greatly is a crisis of leadership. We don't have leaders. Look at the heads of state all over the planet. There are no leaders. There is no one who is willing to tell the truth and brave the onslaught of the news media or an assassin's bullet or whatever would happen. So we have the worst crisis facing civilization ever, and we have a horrible shortage of leadership in key positions. And what he started talking to us, the candidates, about was his experience as a soldier in World War II. And this was, frankly, extremely provocative and striking, especially for those of us who have not been in combat. One of the things that he said was that one of the most important questions in war, and fighting a just war, was the question of love. And he talked about the question of love and dedication between a soldier and his fellow soldiers. And LaRouche recounted something which he had never told us before about when he was a medic in Burma, and 4 soldiers were about to die. They were what they had for an intensive care unit in the jungle, and he knew had he been in the United States, he would have had the technology that would have saved their lives. But because he was there, everything was faulty. The oxygen tubes wouldn't stay together, and so he personally stayed up, I don't know if it was a 24-hour shift, a 36-hour shift, just trying to fight to keep these soldiers alive. And people have heard stories, of cases where young men or women have thrown themselves on a live grenade to save the lives of their comrades. So there's a certain quality in combat, and the way that you win a war is on the strength of love. The way you lose a war is through hatred. And when your enemy is induced to hate, they always make mistakes. They always screw up. So Rachel and I are geographically best situated to represent this principle, since she's in Boston and I'm in New Jersey, and these were critical areas for the American Revolution and the founding of our republic. In New Jersey, as people may know, and I have to say, when I heard we did this roundtable on discussion of Nawaba and I didn't realize I'd become quite such a New Jersey fanatic, but I think I said the name of the state about 20 times. At any rate, but Alexander Hamilton did a great deal of work in the state. He lived in New York City. He founded the New York Stock Exchange. He designed the entire credit system, and he had the city of Paterson, which he and Lafayette and George Washington had seen the falls. Incredible. I mean, it's heavily flooded right now thanks to Irene, but he saw this as an enormous source of power, and what Hamilton actually proposed was that this city be a federal industrial city. And it would have, and what happened was actually Hamilton, as people know, was killed by Aaron Burr in a set-up duel, and the place almost collapsed. At one time, the city of Paterson had a population of about 15 people after this. And then later, it went on to become the #1 producer of duck cloth, Colt revolvers. The Colt family was critical to Paterson and the place where the first locomotives were built. And in fact, the train that was the Union side of the Transcontinental Railroad was built at Rogers Locomotive Work in Paterson, New Jersey. So Rachel and I have a great deal to contribute to this fight. And it really is a fight. I think the other part of war is that you have to recognize we're in a war. If you think about what has happened with Irene, that's bad enough, what the media is not covering, but just let's take a look back at what's happened over the course of the year. What happened at the beginning of the summer? Missouri, we have floods from Montana all the way down to New Orleans. A quarter of our farmland has been wiped out through floods and fires. And you have a science advisor to Obama, John Holdren, who says the world should only hold between 1 and 2 billion people. And Prince Philip, the Queen's royal consort, thinks the world can sustain 2 billion people. So is it really an accident that our food supply has been decimated and that people like George Soros are going to use the food shortages as a pretext to speculate on the price of wheat and rice and corn? You think that we're having trouble with hyperinflation in the United States? Imagine what it means for someone in Indonesia. Look at the Horn of Africa. 12 million people about to die of starvation. It's not an accidental policy, it's a deliberate policy. So that's why the question of war and the question of combat is so critical. And that's what everyone in this room has to develop within yourself, is a certain quality of passion that you will fight for mankind as a whole. So when you think about it, why do people do heroic things? Like the firefighters on September 11th. Did they personally know every person that they were trying to rescue? Did they say, I've really got to save Mr. Brown because he is such a virtuous person? Right? It wasn't that. They fight because you know there's a quality of mankind which is universal, and you love that. And that's what gives you the courage to fight. And the other thing that Mr. LaRouche said to us when we were down there, which I thought was really true, was that when you go to war, when you go into combat, he said the first battle you have is with yourself. Because think about it, why don't you fight? Why don't you do what you should do? Why do you pull back? I'm sure everybody in this room, myself emphatically included, has had moments when you really regret that you didn't do something that you should have done. So the question is, why did you fail at that moment? Why did you not have the courage? And that's a fascinating thing. So in combat, the first enemy is the enemy within. You have to conquer that before you can be a successful warrior. And there's a really good example of this, which I wanted to use from General Grant, who was describing a moment in Palmyra. So I'll just read it because it's fun. says, at the time of which I now write, we had no transportation, and the country about Salt River was sparsely settled, so that it took some days to collect teams and drivers enough to move the camp and garrison equipage of a regiment nearly 1,000 strong, together with a week's supply of provision and some ammunition. While preparations for the move were going on, I felt quite comfortable. But when we got on the road and found every house deserted, I was anything but easy. In the 25 miles we had to march, we did not see a person, old or young, male or female, except 2 horsemen who were on a road that crossed ours. And as soon as they saw us, they decamped as fast as their horses could carry them. I kept my men in the ranks and forbade their entering any of the deserted houses or taking anything from them. We halted at night on the road and proceeded the next morning at an early hour. Harris had been encamped in a creek bottom for the sake of being near water. The hills on either side of the creek extend to a considerable height, possibly more than 100 feet. As we approached the brow of the hill from which it was expected, we could see Harris's camp and possibly find his men ready formed to meet us. My heart kept getting higher and higher until it felt to me as if it was in my throat. I would have given anything to be back in Illinois, but I had not the moral courage to halt and consider what to do. I kept right on. When we reached a point from which the valley below was in full view, I halted. The place where Harris had been encamped a few days was still there, and the marks of a recent encampment were plainly visible, but the troops were gone. My heart resumed its place. It occurred to me at once that Harris had been as much afraid of me as I of him. This was a view of the question I had never taken before. But it was one that I never forgot afterwards. From that event to the close of the war, I never experienced trepidation upon confronting an enemy, although I always felt more or less anxiety. I never forgot that he had as much reason to fear my forces as I had his. The lesson was valuable. So that's Grant, and that was a fight within himself. The other example that I wanted to use, and it's a bit longer, and I hope you forgive me, but I really thought what Chamberlain had to say about this was much more beautiful and profound than what I was going to come up with. And this is Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. People may or may not know him. He was a general in the Union Army of the Civil War. He was from Maine, and he was a theologian. His father really wanted him to be a military general, and his mother wanted him to be a minister. So he ended up becoming a college professor, and he taught singing, and he also was multilingual and a really profound thinker. And at a certain point in the Civil War, he just couldn't bear to sit on the sidelines, so he volunteered. And people today know him. People have seen the movie about Gettysburg, which is fairly accurate, Gettysburg, know that he was the general who held Little Round Top, which was, or he was at that time a lieutenant colonel because he was pretty green. I mean, it really was funny. Since he had a degree, he was assigned to lead a regiment from Maine, although he had absolutely no military training. So he read every book, being a good academic, he read every book on military strategy, and he was the lieutenant colonel. And this battle, Little Round Top, he played a crucial role because he had to hold the flank so that the Confederate soldiers could not get around behind the Union line. But what I want to read you is his account of a battle which was a horrible defeat. And I think his insights from this battle really embody the quality that Mr. LaRouche talked about in combat. It It was like the reverse of Pickett's charge, if people know what that was. Basically, for some reason, the Union Army decided to attack the Confederate troops in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and the Confederate Army was behind a stone wall up a hill. So it meant marching uphill through an open field to attack an enemy behind a wall in the woods. So the Union soldiers got totally slaughtered, not surprisingly. So this is his account. The desperate charge was over. We had not reached the enemy's fortifications, but only that fatal crest where we had seen 5 lines of battle mount, but to be cut to earth by a sword swoop of fire. We had that costly honor which sometimes falls to the reserve, to go in when all is havoc and confusion, through storm and slaughter, to cover the broken and depleted ranks of comrades and take the battle from their hand. Thus we had replaced the gallant few still struggling on the crest, and received that withering fire which nothing could withstand, by throwing ourselves flat in a slight hollow of the ground, within pistol shot of the enemy's works, and mingled with the dead and dying that strewed the field. We returned the fire till it reddened into night, and at last fell away through darkness into silence. But out of that silence, from the battle's crash and roar, rose new sounds, more appalling still, rose or fell, you knew not which, or whether from the earth or air, a strange ventriloquism of which you could not locate the source, a smothered moan that seemed to come from distances beyond the reach of natural sense, a wail so far and deep and wide, as if 1,000 discords were flowing together into a keynote, weird, unearthly, terrible to hear and bear, yet startling with its nearness, the writhing concord broken by cries for help, pierced by shrieks of paroxysm, some begging for a drop of water, some calling on God for pity, and some unfriendly hands to finish what the enemy had so horribly begun. Some with delirious, dreamy voices murmuring loved names as if the dearest were bending over them. Some gathering their last strength to fire a musket to call attention to them where they lay helpless and deserted. And underneath all the time, that deep bass note from closed lips, too hopeless or too heroic to articulate that agony. Who could sleep? Or who would? Our position was isolated and exposed. Officers must be on the alert with their command, but the human took the mastery of the official, sympathy of soldiership. Command could be devolved, but not pity. So with a staff officer, I sallied forth to see what we could do where the helpless seemed so few. Taking some observations in order not to lose the bearing of our own position, we guided our steps by the most piteous of the cries. Our part was but little, to relieve a painful posture, to give a cooling draught to fevered lips, to compress a severed artery as we had learned to do, though in bungling fashion, to apply a rude bandage which yet might prolong the life to saving, to take a token or farewell message for some stricken home. It was but little, yet it was an endless task. We had moved toward the right and rear of our own position, the part of the field immediately above the city. The farther we went, the more the need deepened, and the calls multiplied. Numbers half wakening from the lethargy of death or of despair by sounds of succor begged us to take them quickly to a surgeon. And when we could not do that, imploring us to do the next most merciful service and give them quick dispatch out of their misery. Right glad we were when after midnight the shadowy ambulances came gliding along, and the kindly hospital stewards with stretchers and soothing appliances let us feel that we might return to our proper duty. At last, outwearied and depressed with the desolate scene, my own sunk. I moved two dead men a little and lay down between them, making a pillow of the breast of a third. The skirt of his overcoat drawn over my face helped to shield me from the bleak winds. There was some comfort, even in this companionship, but it was broken sleep. The deepening chill drove many forth to take the garments of those who could no longer need them, and they might keep themselves alive. More than once, I was startled from my unrest by someone turning back the skirt from my face, peering half vampire-like, to my fancy, through the darkness to discover if it were two of the silent and unresisting, turning away more disconcerted at my living word than if a voice had spoken from the dead. Having held our places all the night, we had to keep them all the more closely the next day, for it would be certain death to attempt to move away. As it was only by making breastworks and barricades of the dead men that covered the field that we saved any alive. We did what we could to take a record of those men. A testament had fallen from the breast pocket of the soldier who had been my pillow. I soon sent to his home. He was not of my command, and it proved to be the only clue his parents ever had to his fate. The next midnight, after 36 hours of this harrowing work, we were bidden to withdraw into the town for refreshment and rest, but neither rest nor motion was to be thought of until we paid fitting honor to our dead. We laid them on the spot that they had won, on the sheltered edge of the crest, and committed their noble forms to the earth and their story to the country's keeping. We buried them darkly at dead of night, the sod with our bayonets turning. Splinters of boards torn by shot and shell from the fences we had crossed served as headstones, each name hurriedly carved under brief matchlights anxiously hidden from the foe. It was a strange scene around that silent and shadowy sepulchre. We will give them a starlight burial, it was said, but heaven ordained a more sublime illumination as we bore them in dark and sad procession. Their own loved North took up the escort, and lifting all her glorious lights, led the triumphal march over the bridge that spans the worlds, an aurora borealis of marvelous majesty, fiery lances and banners of blood and flame, columns of pearly light, garlands and wreaths of gold, all pointing upward and beckoning on. Who would not pass on as they did, dead for their country's life and lighted to burial by the meteor splendors of their native sky? So that's from Chamberlain. And I think that's why he did what he did at Gettysburg. So that's what I had to say. And we'll listen to the music, and I think I'd take questions at the end. Thanks.